All right, as people are filtering back, I do want to give Dr. Sowcik a little more of a introduction than I think I probably would for most speakers, just because I want to set the stage for his presentation, which we've talked about being titled "The Emotion Behind Change." And again, we've talked an awful lot about change these last few days. We did the word art at the beginning on Tuesday, which now seems like a week ago, not just 2 days ago. In a lot of the words that you all shared were emotions and feelings about how we think about change and how we're thinking about this whole process and whatnot. And so as this whole kind of, process in its entirety, starting from the survey last summer to here, really, as we talked about it, really knew that it was gonna, COVID has changed us tremendously as an organization and changed what we're all about and how we do things. And everything that we've talked about these last 3 days with these recommendations that the committees have come forth with, again, are going to cause us to do things differently and to think about things differently. And so I really wanted somebody to come and not only assure us that things were going to be okay, but also make us think about how we approach change. And again, with COVID, we didn't really have any say in the matter. It was, we had to react as we did. But as we think about the recommendations that we've heard about, we do have a say in how we approach these things, how we think about it, how we feel about it, what we're really going to get behind and put some of our own energy towards, because it's going to take collectively this organization to get behind one, two more of these, to get behind the ideas that were presented, to really think about extension and what we look like in the next few years. So I called in a favor, and luckily he's still taking my phone calls, because I really think he was a bit bitter and resentful when I did tell him that I was leaving the University of Florida to come back to Maine. But I'm very pleased that Dr. Matthew Sowcik is here to kind of set the stage and to make us think about this. Dr. Sowcik, I would like to say, came to Florida because of me. I was the chair of his search committee that hired him 5 years ago. We just figured that out. And what was interesting is, as you all know, in my former life, I programmed for extension around leadership and leadership development. I had a 75% extension appointment, so I developed and delivered extension programming. And so when Matt came to interview, he kind of looked at me and was like, what is this thing called extension you speak about? And so I feel like for the most of our time that we've known each other, up until the time I've left, I introduced him to the wonderful world of extension programming. And not only has he embraced it, he now has a very large extension appointment, which I actually take great pride in, because he's a phenomenal leadership educator. He's a phenomenal speaker. Oh, by the way, he's even a published author and wrote a children's book on leadership, which will be a door prize today. It's even signed by Dr. Sowcik as well. And he does a great job with groups. He and I said to him via text, I feel like the band's back together, because we spent a great deal of time together, again, conceptualizing programs like this. How do we talk about organizational change? How do we frame it? How do we get people excited about it? And so it brings me great pleasure when my worlds can collide of my previous life and my current life, and bring you Dr. Matt Sowcik. So Matt, take it away.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And all those words are true. And I did come to UF because I had such a great experience in that connection. I'm actually from up north. I'm from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania area. So I am just super excited to be here. I thank Hannah for that introduction. I think the thing she didn't mention, the thing that I'm most proud of, is being a father. That's what I do. I have 2 boys here, and I always start off, especially when talking about change, this idea of change and how quickly change happens. I loved Hannah's, the word usage around the pandemic, kind of a reaction to what we we had to go through, and overnight having everybody kind of move to that online world. I've been doing a lot of conversations with discussions, trainings with leaders down here in Florida around what comes next with the pandemic. And it's amazing. We're moving from this idea of a required reaction where people just had stuff happen to them to more of a, a proactive opportunity with this. And time and time again, I tell people in this presentation that this is the moment we get to define what work looks like, what our world looks like moving forward after the pandemic. And we haven't had that chance, that change in so long. So I think the stuff that you've been going through over the last few days is not only a good exercise, but something that's absolutely critical for every organization to go through. And I think the kind of foresight that Hannah had to bring you guys together to talk about these things is leadership at its best. But with my kids, I always try to talk about them when I get kind of in this discussion of change. Carter is the one on the left there. He's older. Carter is everything that's good about human beings. He is kind and gentle and sweet. He's just an amazingly great boy who gets good grades that I don't have to worry about. If I had one complaint about Carter, he tricked me into believing that's what all children would be like. So we had a second, which is Chase on the right there. And Chase is every gray hair on my head. Every ounce of worry I have comes with him. And the story I always tell about my children is this, that when we had two boys, two responsibilities became mine. The birds and bees talk, which I am so excited to give them when they turn 45 years old. I think it will go really well at that point. And then the second one is potty training. Potty training became my responsibility because, I had a system. I knew the way it was going to work. I could talk to them about those things. And as any good researcher would do, I went out there. I tried to research as much as I could to help with this potty training. So I Googled everything. I asked people, and I found one plan that was absolutely going to work. I had to change them from going in their diapers to this potty training thing, and I was ready. So with Carter, I got excited. I got him excited. I did this like Tony Robbins walk over coals. This is going to be a great experience for you when he had turned 3. And I lined him up as people had told me to do. I tossed some Cheerios into the bowl. I told him to aim. He aimed, he delivered. It was this moment that I'll never forget. I walk out of there pounding my chest, looking at my wife saying like, psh, fatherhood could not be easier. I got this. Chase, when Chase turned 3, I was as excited as possible. I got Chase excited. Chase is always excited. He's always running around. We played music. We were ready. I tossed those Cheerios in the bowl. He lined up, and then he reached in and he ate them. And I thought, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense to me at all. And Chase took a lot longer to potty train in this process. And the good thing about change, or what I want you to take out of this story, is that change deals with people. And there's some really good things that come because change deals with people. People want to be good. We desire to be good. We believe we're good, and we want others to think that we're good. And that's a really important thing. Nobody woke up this morning saying, gosh, I hope Dr. Carter hates me by the end of this. No, all of us wanted to get on, pay attention, ask good questions. All people want to be, or most people want to be perceived as good. And I think that's true with any change, is that we go into change, we go into these opportunities really believing that we're going to make an impact, that good things will come of it. The problem to some degree with dealing with people is that we all have emotions. We're angry and frustrated. We get hurt. We get depressed. We go through things throughout the day. We all have egos. We all believe what we believe in this process. And certainly we see things through our eyes. And that's really an important piece, because in that perception piece, where Carter saw the perception of hitting those Cheerios and Chase saw them as eating them, perception changes really quickly. And the belief that we perceive the world as others becomes really kind of difficult in this process. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. I hope by the end of the hour, you feel really good about the changes that you talked about. But even more so, I want you to be able to identify what you need to do and how you can help others kind of take on some of the change, some of this roadmap that you talked about. We're going to cover 3 really important pieces, ultimately really talking about emotions in this process, because emotions will drive almost everything we do. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But I do think change with people comes down to 3 things. And this can be problems or it can be opportunities, depending on how we see it. Perception, emotion, and communication. So we're going to talk a little bit about that now. Perception, emotions, and communications to ultimately get to how do we use emotion to be able to move forward the stuff that you talked about over the last couple days. I'm not a huge believer that leadership is easy. I think it's really complex, and I think it's mostly complex because we have human behavior involved with that. I'm not a big believer in 7 habits or 3 tenets. I think it's nice to be able to boil things down into simplicity so people can understand it. But the reason we have trouble with leadership is because it's really complex. Now, if I had to give you a model that I really kind of buy into and use, it's probably this one here. I think our perception leads to our thoughts lead to our actions, and our actions lead to our habits. So the way we perceive the world makes us think about the world in a particular way. Those thoughts lead to emotions. Those actions then come out of it, and we do those actions enough, we get to habits in this process. And this is really important in dealing with change. Now, really quickly, Hannah, can you just tell me, do you have like an Ashley Furniture up there? Do you have Raymore and Flanagan? What kind of furniture stores are up there?
I mean, we have the Furniture Gallery. We have some independent retailers, not major chains, but Maine specific.
Furniture Gallery.
Or Martin's. Now, a lot of people go to Martin's for their furniture too.
Wonderful. Miss Holland, did you ever buy a couch from any of these? You're on mute, by the way. Okay.
No, actually, no. I went to usually go to local stores, not big chains.
Got you. Went to a local store. So where did you buy your couch from?
A place called Sweet Dreams.
Oh my gosh. Explain this couch to me. What kind of couch do you have in your house?
It's leather because my husband insisted on it. It is just a couch. It's not a sleeper. It's like super firm, supportive. And it's got a matching chair and ottoman. So it's really kind of like the first grown-up thing we ever bought.
I love that. I love that. I remember we were talking about this earlier before everybody jumped on. And you were telling me a little bit about this idea of buying this couch. You love this couch. Your husband came to you and said, leather, it's got to be leather. I need leather. Do you remember this conversation we were having?
Vaguely.
Vaguely, yep. Great. I'll take that. That's perfect. Vaguely, you were talking about this. I remember you were saying this idea that you and your husband did this. You were going in, you were on his back. You were entering the store. It was this most amazing moment because you were going to finally buy this grown-up couch, and it was a moment for both of you to come together. You were excited. What was the furniture store called again?
It was called Sweet Dreams, and it was probably more of a Titanic moment. I think I was in front on the mast,
I remember as you say that now. Thank you so much for that. I remember those details as you brought it out. He was holding you when you were walking in, opening those double doors. I remember you saying that, and it was great. It was a great moment until something happened. You had this guy come up and say, "Can I help you?" And when he said, "Can I help you?" at the door, what did you think?
I need more help than this.
I love that. So most people think this idea of like, no, I don't want to be bothered by this person. Like, oh gosh, this is the worst moment. I got to get out of this moment. I don't want to even be in this moment. It's amazing. I've done a ton of consulting for organizations around eBay, Mohegan Sun Casino. But one of the ones that I did was Lazy Boy, and it was a great gig. I got to go in for half a day, and they wanted to know about their management and why their management weren't selling as much as they should in that process. So I sat in a Lazy Boy and I saw this, just like your experience. I saw this process of people walking in happy with their kids, happy with their spouse, with others. And then they bust open those double doors and the sales associate would meet them. And they had this this rule. Within 30 seconds, they had to meet the customer at the door. And the same thing happened over and over and over again. People all of a sudden started to do this. Not only would they say, just looking, they would actually, with some kind of Jedi force, would stick their hand up almost to stop that person in their tracks. And then they would run and hide behind a couch for a while in that process. I remember you telling me that you also did that your husband was like, I don't want to talk to this person. And you didn't want to talk to this person, and you hid until you met that perfect couch, that leather couch, that one with all those features you talked about. And you needed to find that sales associate. I remember you telling me a little bit about that sales associate. What was her name? Wasn't it like Marge or something?
Melanie.
Melanie, that's right. It was Melanie. That's right. Thank you so much for adding to this story. I don't usually have that. So Melanie, yes, Melanie, you said met you and you loved Melanie, didn't you? She was amazing. She helped you with the couch. She gave you some of that Scotch Guard protection stuff, a great warranty. You loved it, but you didn't buy that same day, did you? I know you. You're too smart to buy that same day. Actually, 63% of people do not buy on the same day. They go, they research, they look, they go on to Amazon, they try to get it shipped to, but that next day you walked into that store, and what did you do when you busted open those double doors?
I asked for Melanie.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. We go from this process of having a perception that says, I'm going to buy a couch. I walk in, I see this person. My perception is they're going to pressure me. I don't want to be part of this. I don't like this. Our thoughts are, our emotions are, I got to get out of this. And we do something that we don't do anywhere else. Can you imagine going to the dentist, having your mouth open? He comes in, you're like, no, sorry, doc, just looking. You would never do that. But here, we feel completely comfortable stopping that person in their tracks, getting out of that situation. And the habit is over and over and over again, whether we're at a used car dealership or we are buying furniture, we feel really comfortable doing that until we have an experience or we get information that changes our perception. It's amazing. The next day you walk in and you say, Melanie, where's Melanie? I want to tell Melanie I'm back here. We're going to buy this couch together. This is going to be a great moment. So the perception changes. You're no longer sticking your hand up and saying stop. And I think perception really is an important part of change. It's an important part of this process of getting to habits that ultimately build an organization that is critically important to the success of the individuals and the overall organization. To the success of getting your couch, you had to change that perception in that process. So we're going to talk a little bit about perception and what can go wrong with perception, where we're at with perception now. What Hannah did not tell you is that I actually am, and she brought me in for being a magician. Like you're like, oh my gosh, we got a great speaker today. I didn't know we were getting David Blaine too. So here's what I want to do. Hannah broke down all 172 people. We went through all of your profiles over the last year. I know exactly what you're going to do in this magic trick. I currently have 6 cards that are listed here, 6 playing cards. I know which card you're going to pick, and I'm going to remove it from the deck. So here's what I want you to do. I'm going to give you 3 seconds. I want you to go ahead and focus in on a card. The problem with this trick often is that people forget their card, so don't forget your card. And then I'm going to remove it from the deck and see if I do. All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Was I able to remove your card? Oh my, I could leave now. I mean, mic drop, done, it's over with. Let's try it one more time. Let's go back. Pick another card. I know exactly which card you're gonna pick. Oh my God, I removed it again. Kind of black magic. Now maybe you're saying this, Florida. I've heard about Florida man, this is crazy. Or maybe you're putting in the chat now, they're all different. And that's really true. They are all different. If you look at all of them, they're different. But here's what happens. Here's how you get people. This is the issue with perception is this. Well, this is kind of a silly trick. What I'm hoping you'll get out of this is when we have perception of people, we often just focus in narrowly. When we have perceptions of change, we focus in narrowly on just one or two things that we either like or dislike, and we run with that. Think about your friends. Your friends could drive you crazy, but you consistently like them. Or imagine meeting somebody for the first time. They say that first impression is so important. And the reason a first impression is so important is because we narrow in on something we like or we don't like, and then we build all of our decision making off of that process. There's a ton of research that suggests this to be true, and I'll tell you why it happens. There was an amazing professor called Carl Dunker, and he had worked in a number of different universities. When he did this experiment, I believe he was up in Canada, and what he did is he said to his students in a freshman class, God love him, in a freshman class, he said, "Here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to give you some extra credit if you can figure out this problem. There's a candle, a box of tacks, and a book of matches. I want you to attach this candle to the wall and light it without it falling down on the table or off of the wall." And Johnny was so excited. Johnny said, please, professor, pick me. Johnny said, "Here, put the tacks through the candle and get it to stay that way." And unfortunately, the candle was too thick and the tacks didn't go through. Secondly, Sally says, "Oh my gosh, professor, I know it. Take the book of matches, light one of those matches, burn half of the candle, put the wax up on the wall." He tries it, it doesn't stick. It's actually not until he does this that they're able to figure it out. They're able to figure out the solution is to use that box. And what this is called, and you don't need to know this, and there's no quiz at the end, is at least I don't believe there's a quiz at the end. This idea that functional fixedness, as he called it, happens when we're in moments of stress, emotional stress, or we're trying to accomplish a goal that has some pressure to it. So as soon as he attached the extra credit to this, students couldn't see this box for anything other than holding the tacks. As soon as we do this, our mind becomes more creative. We're able to move into that action stage. This really goes along with the cards, because what happens is anytime we meet someone new, or anytime we put down a roadmap that says, here is all of the changes that are going to be happening, we start to feel some stress. We start to feel a little bit unsure about risk. And we start to have this perception that becomes very narrow focused in this process. They suggest creativity decreases significantly when we need it most, when we're sitting there having these roadmaps happen, or we're trying to push change into an organization, or we're just even trying to change our personal relationship. Think about this. When you fight with your spouse or your kids, my guess is that fight looks exactly the same no matter what the topic is. They'll do this, you'll do this. They'll do this, you'll do this. It's always the same. It's because under that pressure, we become narrowly focused and we handle things the same way as we always do. Now we have to take a step back from that perception if we're honestly going to be successful about this roadmap, about these changes, about anything that you have in this life. We have to be able to assess where our emotions are. If we're feeling stressed out, if we're being worried, if there is something that we are just feeling unsettled about, we're probably going to look at that change in a one card way, not realizing that all the other cards change in that process. So how do we start to go down that path? What is that process? Here's what I'd like to know is, what's your perception of the change? And I think this is a really important conversation. I'm just going to break into groups for 5 minutes really quickly. Here's what I'd like you to talk about. How did this process go to this point from your perception? And what is your perception of the changes discussed? Where are you emotionally right now? Where are you from a logical standpoint? Assess where you are from that narrow card perspective at this point. So if you would go ahead and put them into groups, just really quickly, I'd like you to talk about what has happened over the last couple of days. How are you feeling about the change at this point? And emotionally, are you excited? Are you nervous? Go ahead into that group now. I really appreciate it.
we may get a few Matt
Of course.
who don't join a breakout room or who have stepped away from their computer or whatnot. So
Absolutely. That's 100% okay.
thanks again for doing this. I owe you.
You're so welcome. So I really enjoy, you know that. I really enjoy it. This is where I feel at most peace.
Well, and it's different seeing it via this way versus sitting in the back of the room.
Yeah, it's funny. I've really had to figure out how do I take some of those exaggerated mannerisms that I use to build engagement, and how do I get them here? One of the things that's turned out to be really kind of important in that is to like narrow in on one participant and make them part of it, and then narrow in someone else. And I try to pick someone who looks like they'll need a little prompting, but like if they get engaged, it'll be good. And that,
you chose well. As if you scroll through the chat at some point, you chose well, and we will make sure Lynn is duly like rewarded for her participation.
I love that. Yeah. No, I think those are good things when you can get someone, because yeah, I think people connect to, oh my gosh, I can't believe he picked that person or this happened. And
yeah. Yeah, no, it is. It's amazing how, again, I didn't realize how much I would miss. I've loved this process from a leadership perspective or from a programming perspective, and I have to kind of keep in mind again what my role is and where I'm at, but I miss doing things like this with you.
No, it really is true. I think people are always asking what's next for you, and like, this is my happy place. Like, I really respect that you did and made those changes and moved up. But man, I really love this sort of stuff. I really love it with doing it with you. I miss that so much. So this is a good day for me.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome. Now I'm gonna have to completely redo my reflection, portion this afternoon, since you're taking my questions, but that's okay.
Oh, better put good to great in there. I'm gonna read good to great real quickly.
Yeah.
I'm using good to great with the commissioners.
It's still relevant.
The reason I like it is it combines some of the research and some of the thoughts, and you can have a good conversation. And I saw you do it enough so that I can recycle some of those questions and see how that process happens. So that was a good thing.
Yeah. Did Florida cancel their spring break this year? I know everybody's in Florida on spring break anyway, but is UF having a spring break?
No, they canceled it. We started a week later, and they're just going straight through, and that has been received not great from students.
Yeah, they're doing the same thing here. Next week, there's like 2 kind of take it easy days, or faux reading days, but it's still yeah. But I think
it's funny. I don't think, even if you took it away and then gave it back, I don't think people would be like it. Yeah. It seems that they were unhappy with that change to begin with, and then that was all they were seeing. So
yeah. Now, have you gotten your first shot? I know a lot of folks have.
I did. Yeah, I got my first shot on Saturday, actually.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. How about yourself?
Nope. We're the governor here is doing it by ages, and even when the education component came down from the federal government, it's still just K through 12 at this point in time. So, again, as of May 1, it's going to be wide open. So I feel like, I don't have that much longer left. So.
As strange as it is, similar in Florida, the governor came out and said only K through 12. FEMA opened a site in Jacksonville, and because it was a national site, they were honoring the national perspective that college teachers were also. So everyone from UF in like hordes has been going down, and it's such a weird site to be going into this FEMA tent and having Army individuals, pluck you with this stuff. But yeah, no, most people here, at least at UF, who have wanted it, have been able to get it.
Yeah, well, we'll get there eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I look forward to some of that. I don't know how much we'll go back to the way it used to be, but certainly the idea of just being able to take the kids to out to a park or do something like that instead of being home all the time is important.
Yeah, I look forward to taking a few days off and coming south. And
that's right.
Yeah. And I
That's
think
the 5-minute timer. Do you want me to close the rooms?
You got to close that rooms. You got to. Yes, I got so much important stuff to say still. Would you just let me know when they're back? Because I can't see that.
I
I
can
know it
Yes, it's 36 seconds.
Thank you so much.
I accidentally came back too soon.
We were missing you, so it actually worked.
I know. Very much enjoyed your presentation so far. I think the exercises were great. Everybody was commenting, especially on the card one. That's really good.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I'll try not to ruin that for the second half of this. Try to keep that.
Yeah, that was a great icebreaker.
Thank you.
I also noticed that people couldn't stop commenting about furniture stores.
It's amazing how we all think that. It's one of the few things that I have been found that everybody agrees with that, thinks that, and acts that way. Yeah.
Everyone should be back.
Great. Well, welcome back. I hope you had a chance to dialogue around this. Hannah let me know that you will be doing a reflection later, so there'll be opportunities to talk about this in a little bit. I do want to give some more opportunities for you to get together and talk a little bit about these pieces. So I'm going to move forward. If you have any insights or you do have anything that you want to share, please feel free to do that in the chat. But I think the really important part of perception is kind of understanding these few things here in this process. And that's the idea that perception becomes really, really important as we move forward with this idea of how do we change? How do we use what we know from the last couple of days, things that we have to change to make the organization better? How do we take the things that we know are needed now in post-pandemic and roll those out? And I think these are some true statements here, and certainly we'll have time at the end if you disagree with any, but you don't change unless you perceive something needing to change in that process. And it's really funny, other people will not see you change until you talk about needing to change in that process. The reason 360s work so well is because often when you're taking a 360 leadership assessment or you're getting feedback on how to change, it lets the people know around you that you perceive this as important. You perceive this change as important, and it's one of the few times in your life that people will actually see you differently based on the feedback that they give. So you can't change unless you perceive the need to change. You will not change unless you can see the world differently. So you can start to have perception that isn't narrowly focused. And I hope that's a lot of what happened over the last couple of days. And I think that's important for the reflection this afternoon, is to talk a little bit about, do you see this as different? And do you see it as something that needs to change? Because those two perceptions will lead to your thoughts, lead to your actions, lead to those habits every single day in that. And then finally, you will not influence someone else until you see the world through their eyes. And John Maxwell, who is a writer, a pretty famous writer of leadership kind of books and curriculum, defines leadership as just influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I think when we talk about how do we lead change from an emotional standpoint, we need to help others understand the importance. So you can't influence someone else until you can see something through their eyes, perceive the world through their eyes. So perception becomes really important as that first step, taking stock right now in, where am I? How do I believe these changes need to happen? And are they something that's important that I want to work on every day? Now, often what gets wrapped up in this is this idea of risk. So when we perceive change, the perception of risk happens. Here's where I was, here's where I want to be. There's some risk involved with that. And risk brings about thoughts, it brings about emotions, it brings about actions to either stop risk from happening or engage fully in risk. And you know very well that there are people who are much more adapt to risk, want to be engaged with risk-taking behaviors, and There are those who are very adverse to risk and try to hold back from risk. And that's really because of their perception of risk at this current point. When we start talking about risk, we start talking about the emotion associated with risk. I got the chance to see this, to look this over. This is the word cloud that you put together on Tuesday. Is that right, Hannah? On Tuesday? Yep. So you put this together. What was the question, Hannah? Do you remember that led to this word cloud?
Yes, it was just as you are thinking about change and as you are thinking about these next 3 days, what word comes to mind?
I love that. So when you perceive this idea of change, what word comes to mind? Once again, when you perceive change, what's the word that comes to mind? And these are the words that you ultimately came up with here. And the thing I love about this is there are folks, a large number of folks, that have some real positive emotions associated with that perception. That perception they have of change has led them to say things like there's opportunity and growth, and that they're excited. And excited is a great positive emotion. There's a chance for more and possibility. And of course, there's those folks that think differently about that emotion, that it's going to be hard. There's some apprehension. What a wonderful emotional laden word. Trepidation. Man, that's good. Anxiety, loss. And you can see how our perception is then tied to this emotional reaction. So once again, if we aren't aware of our perception, think about you on Tuesday, where you were at. Has that changed at this point in time? And my argument would be that if we want to truly understand the emotion that is associated with this idea of change, you personally, if you want to understand how you're going to address this change, understanding your perception, which of these words you used, and what emotion is connected to that becomes very important, because it's all associated with that perception of risk, the perception of risk that engage with this. Emotion becomes so important in everything we do. So important in everything we do. It drives every single behavior we have. If you want success in this, we have to understand the perception that leads to emotion that will ultimately lead to change. And think about this. When I was much younger, 17 to 24, I was a smoker. Ugh, I know. I was a smoker, terrible. I was at Wilkes University in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and I was a young professor at the time. And I would do this thing where I would say, like, okay, I'm going to put 2 solid hours of work in, and then I'm going to go quickly smoke a cigarette outside. And I don't know, for some reason, people didn't see me as a smoker. So when I was outside there, it was amazing. They would say the same thing to me over and over and over again. They would either say, well, there was always those ones who would say, like, can I bum a smoke? But besides those folks, they would come up to me and they would say, oh my God, that's going to kill you. That's what they would say. And it was amazing. I always thought it would be funny just for me to, like, all of a sudden drop it and say, oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much for telling me. I didn't know. You just saved my life. Because the truth is, I knew that all the billboards on the way in that said smoking was bad, the warning pack on the side. I didn't smoke because it was the logical decision. I smoked because it was an emotional decision. It was an emotional decision. This happens in every walk of life. It's amazing. I'll go in and talk to my freshmen and I'll ask them how many texted and drove on the way into school. And like 95% of them will raise their hand. They all know it's not good for them. But when the phone buzzes or plays that, 80s song to let them know who's calling them, they can go from logic that this is it's worse than drinking and driving, there's a chance I can get into an accident, to convincing themselves emotionally that they need to read this, that it's not going to happen to them. So we judge smokers, we judge people who text and drive, but the truth is the automobile industry had to install that annoying buzzing sound in our cars, the in our cars, so that we put on the one thing in that car that would save our lives. Emotionally, we don't do that. As human beings, we know the risk. We know seatbelts save lives, but we still need someone to make a more annoying thing for us so that emotionally we don't want that more than we don't want to wear our seatbelt. Emotion drives every activity. If you go into a restaurant and look on a menu, the reason you make the choice you do is because you like something or you feel like this would be a good choice for you. It's all emotional decisions. Change is the same absolutely in this process. Emotions drive what we do. Now, if you think about it, it works in organizations all the time. You know, if you're going to ask Hannah for a raise, you're not waiting until you really screw up so that she's mad at you to go in and say, hey, I want that raise. You're waiting until you do something amazing or things are going really well to ask for that. And the same is true from a positive standpoint. If you want to be creative, you need to be in a certain emotional state. If you just get in a car accident on the way to a training, you're not walking in and wanting to hear stories about, you know, my kids or play card games or you're probably like, oh gosh, I have so much on my mind, I can't do that. Emotions and thoughts are connected. If you want to get to a place where you get away from that narrowing perspective, get away from that functional fixedness of not being able to be creative, always doing things the same way, you have to emotionally understand where you are so that you can connect this emotion with these thoughts. I haven't done any research, but I bet you could do some research around the idea of those folks in that word cloud who said things like opportunity compared to folks who said trepidation and where they are with that change process. And it's not a bad thing to have trepidation or to be anxious. It's just important to be aware of it because that emotion is driving every single activity that you'll do from this point forward. So it's really important that individually we assess where we are so we don't have that narrowing, so we don't see things only in one way. If you're anxious and something goes wrong in the reflection later, you're gonna be like, yep, see, I knew it. I knew this was gonna be terrible. I knew Hannah was tricking us. I knew that I should be anxious around this. But if you're seeing it as an opportunity or great, you're gonna be in that reflection, you're gonna be saying, see, look at all the things that we can do. Look at the possibility. My gosh, I got a children's book today signed by the author. Nothing could be better in my life. This is good. Emotion will drive the way that we narrowly perceive this change. The problems often are our emotions, the way that we view emotions are chaotic and haphazard and visceral, incompatible with reasoning. Think about this. If I said to you, remember back to the days when you were dating, playing the market, out there trying to find your soulmate. Let's say you ran across me and I said, oh my God, we are great friends. We did that training together. We're bonded for life. I have this perfect person for you. I want to set you up. They're amazing. Here's some things though. They happen to be way, way too rich. They have so much money. Is that going to be okay? And you're going to say, I can help them spend it. Yes. Yes. And you're going to say, you know what? Most people would describe them as overly handsome or overly pretty. You might be like, yeah, no, I'm in. I'm still in on this. You could say, oh my gosh, they're overly, they're overly emotional. All of a sudden you're like, no, I'm not dating right now. I'm just taking some time to understand me. As soon as I say overly emotional, people get worried. We don't know how to handle emotion. We don't know how to understand emotion. And when there's a lot of emotion, we want to get away from it. It's just naturally part of our subconscious in this process. So we see things as lacking from judgment or haphazard, when in fact, emotion can actually be used to sustain, direct, and arouse activity in people, to engage people in what we need them to do. I will make the argument that if you really want to see change and you want to feel this change throughout the organization, you're going to have emotion around it. And you're going to have positive emotion around it. And you're going to have to address with others that positive emotion, because it is absolutely connected to rational decision making. When we're talking about moving forward with something, it is that urgency, it's that importance, and it's that positive nature that people bring that will unite people into making change happen. To do that tipping point, as they often would call it, to get enough people to move forward. It's certainly not an opposition of intelligence, but it is this idea of a higher order of intelligence in this process. How do we use that higher order, emotion and intelligence, to move a decision forward? And how do we show up knowing that that emotion makes such an impact in ourselves, in seeing a bigger, broader picture, and in others, allowing them to see a new perception around this? So how do we manage that emotion associated with risk? There's probably lots of Anns. I'm going to try her name here. It's spelled Lichtenwalner. Is it? How do you pronounce your last name?
Lichtenwalner, and in German, it derives from light in the woods. And it's a Pennsylvania name.
You, my friend, are the light in the woods right at this moment. I am super excited about your participation right now. I know we had a chance to talk a little bit about this prior to this starting. Can you just tell me really quickly, what is the best thing that has ever happened to you?
Holy Ned.
I'm sure there's lots. But
Such a loaded question.
Yeah, like what's the best thing that has ever happened to you?
Well, I would say right at the moment, you know, coming to UMaine is right up there.
I love that. Where did you come from?
I was in Oregon at the time when I came here.
Oh my gosh, I get it. I get it. Traveling, going outside of the state, starting a new job. When did you start your new job?
2008 in April.
Wonderful. Did it involve any risk moving from Oregon, coming to Maine?
Well, I think everybody understood that that was a very unstable and troubled time financially for the country and for all of us. For me, it was a very interesting new job with a lot of new faces and new tasks, and it was a wonderful challenge.
Let me ask you this question. If it didn't work out, if you got there and people were like, we hate you and we don't want you here, and this is the worst hire we've ever had, what would happen? What would have happened to you?
Gosh, well, I don't know. Probably would have, I have a tendency to dig in and try to figure things out and fix them if possible.
I mean, just in our brief relationship, I think one of two things would have happened. You probably would have won them over anyway with your kindness and sweetness in this process. But at the worst case scenario, you just found another job. You would have gone somewhere else. You would have brought your talents somewhere else in this. Why did you ultimately take the risk, knowing that things might not have worked out? Why did you change?
Well, I think it was just, take the deep breath and dive, when you need to dive into a cold swimming pool or something like that.
Probably a good opportunity for you too.
Great opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about this forever, and I love this. And thank you so much, Ann, for sharing. Everybody, round of applause for Ann. She's amazing.
Thank you.
Lucky to have her. I think the piece that I'd love for you to think a little bit about is, in everything that is good that's happened in your life, the best things that have happened in your life have come with a great deal of risk. I would say, and from my brief introduction, my kids are absolutely one of the best things that ever happened to me, but there is a great risk in having children. Like, what if I blow it? What if it goes terribly wrong in that process? When I moved from Pennsylvania, where I had worked for 15 years before I came to the UF, I had tenure, I had all these things already situated. I gave it all up because there was an opportunity. I knew it would be better for me. I was excited about that change. But there was a huge risk to coming down here, not having any idea what the heck extension was, and meeting the person probably most connected to extension the first day eating burgers. There's a huge risk in this. But I want us to rethink the way we see risk. The anxiousness, the trepidation in this process. How do we see that? And is it similar to all the other risks that we've taken that have really paid out? And how have we done that? And my guess is Ann would say, and I would say, we did it by being positive, by understanding our emotions, by jumping into it, by not feeling like we had to have all the right answers. Having some humility, having some grace, but going forward and learning from that process. I didn't know what extension was at the University of Florida with a 30% extension appointment. but every single day learning and growing and loving it and falling in love with it and having cheerleaders like Hannah, which she's so good at, really kind of brought me to this place where that change was so good. So risk is an essential part of the emotion that we go through. The final piece that I want to talk about for just 2 minutes, and then we'll have certainly some time for some questions. Now that we've checked off perception and its role and emotion and its role, if perception's the thing that we ultimately have to deal with when we're dealing with change, and emotions either push change forward in a positive way or they don't, communication becomes the reason change happens. And the way we communicate becomes really, really important individually on how we change that organization. Unfortunately, we often see communication as this, as information or words or data. We have this email that comes out every day at the University of Florida that is like 3 pages long about the stuff that's happening every single day. And every single day I delete that email without reading it. Every single day. I don't know why I do it. I know somebody puts a lot of time into it. It's just I've read it a couple times. It doesn't apply to me. They put these words out there. It's like a dump overload. And I don't read it. Because the truth is, communication isn't just information or words or data or messages. Communication is sharing, understanding, and meaning. It's not until that sharing happens that we've actually communicated in a way that people can connect and move forward with that. And that becomes really important as we're talking about change. Once again, if perception is this idea of why change needs to happen, and emotion is whether it's going to happen, communication is the process for it happening. Communicating with each other, how you communicate outwards, and how that collective shared understanding of meaning happens in this process. And I know you've gotten that to this point, and it's going to be critical to continue to talk about that, to continue to work on that individually and collectively as we move forward. I want to tell you a little bit, 3 important points or tips that I think can help you with this change in, communication for change communication. First is be really purposeful and intentional about your communication. A great study that happened a few years back is they said, and this ties into emotions and communication, they put 2 different groups out there. And in one of the groups, they had the people who were part of the research study talk about the room, the environment, all while they're putting this puzzle together. And what they didn't know is that 2 of the 6 people were actually Confederates or were people who were, aligned with the researcher to say particular things. And what they found was this, is when that group came together and they were working on a puzzle, if the people who were working with the researcher said, boy, I really like this room, but this is a really difficult puzzle, 1 positive and 1 negative, individuals saw that environment as negative. 2 positives for every 1 negative comments, people saw it as negative. 3 positives to 1 negative. I love this room. Boy, you have amazing sweater. Oh my gosh, Hannah Carter's so amazing. And this is a really difficult puzzle. 3 positives to every 1 negative. People were unsure on how the culture was. It wasn't until they had 6 positives to every 1 negative that employees felt positive about the environment they were part of. The reason I tell you that is because what will happen with change is often we have a 1-for-1. You see it in the word cloud to some degree, that you have some positives and you have some negative emotions associated with that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't address the difficulty around change. What I am saying is we have to be really aware of how much we're talking about the negative with change and how much we talk about the positive opportunities with change, because it will quickly color the culture that is there in that process. So every time you communicate, every time you talk about this roadmap, every single time you move forward with it, know that you're impacting another person, you're impacting the culture. So communicate with this purpose, communicate your purpose in your engagement and how that will ultimately shape the relationships, the perception of expectations, and how you engage forward. When you use emotions to communicate, you can't help but tell stories. It's really important to know that you can't pass on someone else's message. Dr. Carter could have said over and over and over again, this is important. Roadmap is important. We got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do this. You'll never be able to pass on her message. You have to create the message yourself that you want to talk about. Reshape the way you perceive this, tie your emotions into it, and then tell a story that connects to why this change is so important. It's amazing when we have that shared meaning and understanding, when we can tell a story, like the story we heard about the couch, or the story we heard about Anne moving from one side of the country to the other, how we get connected to that, how immediately I'm like, oh my gosh, I moved from the north to the south. I get it. I get where you were at. Stories constitute probably the single most powerful weapon we all have to be able to make change happen. It's so important if we can tell our own personal story and how people will resonate with that. And finally, it goes back to what I was suggesting before, communicating by understanding that we're sharing in this process together, in relationship to this process together. Default to humility, default to grace. As we learn and as we grow and as we change, I promise those will guide your communication. Ask questions, understand why people's perceptions are the way they are. Explore why your emotions and other emotions, and know that your emotions can change at any moment. That's what this humility piece is about, is that we're consistently learning and growing. As Anne said, with a great deal of humility, if nobody liked me, I would still try to go and start to make changes and engage with them in a way that I hope I could learn to be better in that process. Finally, treat this as a laboratory. I know every leadership guru out there says leadership is so important. It's a position, we need to make decisions. You make strong decisions and you move forward. This is the way you do it. That's all a lie. This is all a laboratory. It is so complex. Find a problem that you have, identify that problem, figure out your perception around it, suggest some changes, put those changes into place, and then assess whether they work or not, and then make some new changes based on what you find. If we're going to reinvent the world based on our pandemic, if we're going to reinvent our organizations based on this pandemic, it's going to be critically important that we treat leadership much more as a laboratory. If we treat change as a laboratory, one that we want to find as much data, as much information about a problem we have, put some solutions into place, and then test that, assess that, and then make some new changes based on what we learn. It's a continual process. It certainly isn't something out of the gate. And that's what I love about this retreat, and what I certainly love about Hannah's work with this. She's always been really gifted from a leadership standpoint in understanding the process of this, saying, we're going to set people up to have these conversations. I'm sure that, if we were face to face, she'd have her flip chart out. She'd be writing in markers. She'd be getting everybody talking. She'd be engaging. But at no point would she promise you that as long as we go through this, then everything is going to be better moving forward. The hard work comes next in making sure your perception, your emotions, and your communication is aligned consistently to put this roadmap at the forefront of what you're moving forward with. So the question I'll leave you with today, and probably Hannah will talk a little bit about with reflection, hopefully she'll talk, is like, what's one positive change you can make today based on what you talked about? How do you get your perception in line with that change? How do you understand where your emotions are? How do you use those emotions to arouse, direct, and sustain people's activity along with that? And then how do you communicate purposefully with stories and a great deal of humility around that particular change that contributes to the overall roadmap? That becomes critically important. As I wrap up, I hope you got that perception matters a great deal, that we do need to take purposeful, emotionally intelligent risks in moving forward, and that we absolutely need to utilize this power of communication at this point. Individually, we are all capable, but collectively, if we all get it right, it's amazing how change can happen and how organizations can grow from this process. The truth is, it's going to be so important with the post-pandemic. It's everything I talk to organizations about is we now have this moment. We haven't had this moment since the Industrial Revolution to define what works. We're still meeting in meetings and doing all these things based on stuff that happened 40, 50, 60 years ago. This is our moment to now recognize that we have a chance to change, to grow, and to build organizations that are ready for 2021 and the next 50 years, the next 60 years, 70 years. So with that said, I have 4 minutes. Hannah never told you, I did one training for her, this is a side note, in which I had 2 hours. For some reason, my phone or the clock, or I wasn't doing, so I thought I only had an hour, and I finished up in an hour, and she said, oh, you have another hour left. So I just kept talking and talking and talking and talking. And she still hired me back the next day to come do training. So I appreciate that. I do think I'm on time now.
You are, Dr. Sowcik. Thank you.
To ask questions.
Let's give you a round of applause virtually, however however you choose to do it. Thank you so much, Matt. I so appreciate this. We do have 3 minutes. If there is a burning question out there, if you want to throw in the chat or just, speak up, certainly. There's been a couple of questions. No, we can't afford to hire Matt, unfortunately, to come work at the University of Maine. That we did get that question several times, but we'll try to work him in where we can if there's an opportunity. As I said, as we think about this and next steps, we may see Matt again if we can lure him to Maine during the summer months when it's just brutal in Florida. Matt, the comments have been phenomenal in the chat. I know you haven't been able to see them. You can certainly stay on if you want to after we adjourn and scroll through if you need some positive affirmations for the day. That would be great. We did have one question, and it was Hob, and I'm going to go back to it because I think it's really important is, how do we keep this going and not revert back? The tendency is, okay, we're all going to leave here and we're all going to be like, yes, we're going to do this and we're going to remember all the great things that Dr. Sowcik said, but how do we keep this fresh and at the forefront?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the truth is, you will, everybody always does go back, and I think that's what I see with all leadership trainings, all retreat. Like you think about Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins comes out, he's screaming, he's yelling, he's got people running through rocks, hot molten lava rocks, and like people leave there feeling like they can run through a wall, and then 4 days later they're back to doing exactly what they always did. We naturally are drawn back to the things that make us feel safe and comfortable. You actually have to change your perception on this. If this change is important enough for this organization, that's what's going to move this forward. I think you talk about stuff like that. Why is this change so important? What will we get out of it? And then emotionally, you got to bring those with you. You have to be able to say, I'm going to wake up today and do one positive thing towards this change piece. I'm going to go in and engage it. What they do suggest is that it takes about 21 to 28 days after a presentation, after engaging in leadership training, to actually change a habit. So 21 to 28 days. And think about this. I mean, Greg Kranich, is that right? I crushed it, didn't I?
I've heard all variations of it, so
that's great. Greg, who do you work next to? Who's near your office? Who's right located next to you when you go back to work?
If we're all back to work, Laura Wilson's right next to
Laura Wilson. That's right. So just imagine we go back to work and you walk in and the first day you bust open those doors to the office. You go in and you say, Laura, I got to tell you, you're the most amazing coworker ever. I am blessed to work next to you. This is the greatest organization in the world to work at. What does she say? She probably says something to the extent of, Greg, you've been drinking in the morning, and I don't think that that's good. But then you do it the second day, and you do it the third day, and you do it the fourth day. You do it 21 days in a row. On the 22nd day, you walk in, you quietly open the doors, you sit down, and you don't say anything. Laura's probably saying, what's wrong, Greg? It takes 21 to 28 days to get people to change around you. It gets 21 to 28 days for you to change. It's going to take you about 3 or 4 weeks of every single day making this a priority, this roadmap a priority, letting each other know how this is a priority, and developing those communication skills to get that. So I guess that's how I'd answer the question.
And I think that was beautifully answered, Matt. And again, thank you so much for answering my call, for being here with us today. And again, I know on Tuesday when we talked, I was a little bit, when we had to change our agenda, but again, serendipity won out, because I think this is a perfect way, and you were the perfect way to end these 3 days together, and really all that we heard, and as we think about moving forward and what happens. So I'm glad it worked out. I miss you.
Yeah,
This was awesome and appreciate you greatly for doing it. With that, it is 12:01. We're a minute late, but let's break for lunch and we'll come back at 12:30 and kind of tie a bow around all this and figure out next steps. And certainly when you come back for lunch, if there's animals involved or, you can lure, I know we talked about bringing all pets on. So we'll use the afternoon as an opportunity to do that. So we'll adjourn until 12:30. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everybody.